You're watching an Oracle Cloud end-user training video lesson presented by Panameer. This video is part of the Supplier Qualification training course. All Panameer end-user training courses are accessible from the Learn menu on Panameer.com. In this lesson, we're going to walk end-to-end through the supplier initiative or qualification process. All supplier qualification transactions occur as part of the sourcing process circle. So with that, let's jump out of this presentation and into Oracle Cloud and walk through our transaction.
Okay, so now we're in Oracle Cloud, logged in as Calvin Roth, who's a buyer/PO manager. And again, the goal of this lesson is to walk end-to-end through a supplier initiative, which requires some interplay back and forth between a supplier contact and Calvin Roth, in this case, the buyer that's initiating the actual supplier initiative, or what's also called a qualification. Let's get started. We'll scroll up here to the main menu. We'll open that menu. We'll go to the procurement functional area, and within there, we're going to select the supplier qualification application. You could do so here on the springboard as well. That takes us to the supplier qualification workbench. And from there, we'll open the task panel and we'll click Create Initiative. Okay. So this is the first dialog box. What we want to do here is we want to put it in the title for this initiative. So let's call this Data Modernization Efforts, right? And from here, we'll click Create. Calvin is the one who's going to create this particular initiative for that procurement. And so you see it opens up with 4 train steps. So we'll go top to bottom, tab left to right, and through the train stops. So we'll put in some kind of description here. We are looking to modernize the converted data from our legacy application. Okay. Okay. And this is all internal. And so you'll see as we scroll down here, what we really want to do is 3 different things. And usually one of them is actually optional because a lot of times it'll be very simple. So today we'll follow that rule. So the first section here, there's qualification. So we want to find the qualification that we want our suppliers to respond to. So let's look at what we have in typing modern. And there's other videos that explain and this particular qualification is part of how we use supplier initiatives to modernize converted data. So we're not going to cover that here. We're just going to go end to end, but that's what you're going to see us use. So just a snippet of what we use larger. If we wanted to define, or if Calvin wanted to define other people on the evaluation team for this initiative, he could do so here. We're not going to worry about that. We go back to our qualifications, scroll down, and I'm going to select the supplier that I want to add. So I'm going to click Search and Add. This is going to take me through suppliers. So let's say, for example, I go through and I select a supplier here, and then I see any number of different suppliers. If I want to click on this supplier, let's say, for example, I see 5 or 6 different suppliers. One of the really nice things about having cloud and having all the data and transactions in the same environment is I can click this link and it shows me all of the transaction history from sourcing, from ordering, from business classifications, the qualifications that are on the profile. I get a lot of data with which to know which suppliers I want to invite. So let's keep it simple. We're going to take this particular supplier. We're going to add them to our selection. Okay, and there you have it. One supplier has been added. What you'll also notice is that selected suppliers here. We could go and add any number of different suppliers, but we're just going to take this one supplier and we're going to continue back into our initiative. So now you can see I have my supplier. So when you broadcast an initiative, this is very interesting within how suppliers are set up. We're either broadcasting to a site. So if they have buyer or sales at ABC company, that's how we would broadcast to a site. Not as favorable. What we really want is we want to have a contact. We want to know who we're broadcasting to. And that's what we have here. That this Scott Walls is an actual salesperson here at Panameer that we're broadcasting to. So with that, we're going to go ahead and go to the next train stop. And here we look at the configuration. So what you're really looking for here is if you had evaluation or different people evaluating, or if on the past stop, I'll go back for a second, we had added any internal responder then this is where we could make a decision of who we're going to send this information. We only have one, and we're going to send a questionnaire. Questionnaires are the heart of how you get data on supplier profile if you're not converting or manually entering, or part of the registration process, right? So now we've decided what the qual was. If we had an evaluation team, we added them. Then we decided who we're going to send this qualification, or really this initiative to, right? It's a supplier initiative containing a supplier qualification. And so we've said who we're going to send it to. That looks good. We then go to the next train stop, and here's where you just run through what the actual train stop would look like, or excuse me, the actual questions would look like. And you can see that here. And this is what the suppliers will see largely. Now, the reality is, even if I know how I'm doing this and configuring, I probably have a certain way that we do this. We'll cover it in a separate video, but it's really not enough to just look at something like this. You're almost going to have to run through the configuration, and it depends. If you take, for example, some of the stuff that you'll see here, we have a mixture of DFFs. We have a mixture of fields that are payment file where we just ask you to check a box. This business classification is really an object containing 5 or 6 fields. And so it can be a little bit different, and there's 5 major, let's call them containers for data that are on the supplier that we're asking questions for here. All right, so let's scroll back to the beginning. Here you're going to put what the supplier will see when they start this question. So please answer the questions below. Thank you. All right. And so that's how I go through. I would look at all of the different data values potentially that I'm asking for questions and sections. Everything looks good. Then I'm going to say next. This takes me to the final step where I'm going to review everything. Qual areas, suppliers, questions, configuration, who gets sent what, right? When I'm satisfied that this is good, then I'm going to save this. And I'm going to do the last part of step 1, which is to create and launch the initiative. I'm going to click the launch button. About to launch this initiative. So this then is the actual creation of the initiative, and what it also does, and depending on how you've got your system set up, we don't have usually approval on this. If you're going to consult somebody internally, they're going to be a respondent. But what we do have here is notification, and that notification will show up in step 2, which you'll see here in a second. This is the completion of step 1 to create and launch the supplier initiative. Okay, now we're logged in as Scott Walls. Scott Walls is the supplier contact, or let's say in sales for the supplier. And so Scott will go to the supplier portal functional area, open the supplier portal applications, which will give him a menu here on the left-hand side of the screen. He will scroll down until he sees the qualification section, and he'll want to choose manage questionnaires. Again, you'll really want to watch questionnaires in the video we did on that, because it explains the containers at the supplier level, how the questions populate those containers, how they're grouped into groups, then into qual areas or assessments, etc. And these same questions will be used or could be used in other places within the application. All that's covered in that video. Okay, so now we see Scott, right, logged in, and we see that he has a questionnaire here. I can either click directly on this link, or I can click respond here. But before I do, notice that Scott would have received a notification, and then again, depending on how it's set up, an email. Let's go ahead and have Scott respond. So he clicks the respond button, and it's really just going to show him the questionnaire. And then he's going to have to go top to bottom through the questionnaire. So again, here's our introduction that we saw before. And we've got 2 basic questions, right? Well, not exactly, because they're questions that require or that contain branches. So modern data set. Does your firm have any business classifications? Yes, we do. Now, one of the things that's really nice, again, this is all in the setup, is I can have this data reflect what's already on your supplier profile. So if I'm sending this out to a lot of different suppliers, I don't want my suppliers to have to re-enter data we've already got for them, but I want them to see it and validate it. Now, I could also set it up that if there's data there, don't even bother. Again, these are all setup options, if you will. So let's say that we're going to go through here. Do we have any of these supplier diversity? And then this is interesting, right? So this is small business certification. So this is one of the ways that you see fields. When you see this data here, I'm going to click on that hyperlink. this goes to the object that is a business classification, right? You see multiple different fields, so I can validate that, or I can even add data. So that tells me I've got data versus where if I scroll down a little bit and we've got veteran. Now let's say, for example, I don't have any of that data. Well, I can add a record here that says I want to do, let's say, self-certified. My certification number is this, and I have a start date or I don't. Okay, but that will allow me confirm the accuracy. That allows me to enter the data. I scroll down a little bit more. Are you a US-based company? I say yes. And then I get several more questions. First, click the check boxes below to decide or to denote the payment methods I receive for bills and invoices. Then select your firm's tax order type. Again, this is something that we really need to stay on top of. And they would select what they've got here from a tax order type. And then we should see, but for whatever reason, we're not seeing it. I can attach or create an attachment here that allows you to have a blank W-9, download it, fill it out, upload it, and away you go. All right. So keeping it, again, relatively simple, I'm going to save the answers to my questions, and I'm going to submit them. Those do not yet get stored on, let's see here, it requires you can't submit the questionnaire, 1-2A. Sorry, attachment for that. Here's where it's asking me for the response. Okay, and so let's say, sorry, let me explain what we just saw. When we say yes, we have a certification, then what's occurring is it's asking us for that certification. So I'm just going to pick some file that I've got on my computer, and then I'm going to direct that file to someone. In this case, I only have one option, and let's say this is called certification here, right? And the way that these questions are set up, every question we have that. Now we have to say, do you agree to attach this blah, blah, blah. I can also say no. And here I can say no. Okay. Now let's try to save again. Okay. Everything looks better. Now I want to submit. So again, this has not been added yet to the supplier record officially, or question. So what I did in step 1, we created and launched the initiative. In this step, step 2, the supplier received the notification, went in, responded to the initiative, and now has submitted that response back. And in step 3, we'll log in as Calvin Roth and we'll take a look at this response from his side. So with that, that's the end of step 2. Okay, so now we're back in as Calvin Roth. And we're going to perform step 3. In step 3, Calvin is going to review and accept or request a resubmission of the response to the initiative by Scott, the supplier contact at Panameer. So first, let's take a look, and we should have a notification, right? So they responded to this questionnaire, right? Okay, so if you click that, that shows what these responses were. And so in this case, Calvin can scroll down, doesn't even have to go through the menu options to get there, and look at all the different response. And then there's a series of actions. So this is covered in a different video, but this is essentially more information or return to responder. If Scott forgot the attachment and Calvin, that was unacceptable to him, he could return to responder, in which case there'd be a notification that goes back out to Scott, the supplier, as well as a link in there that he can click. And there's usually an exclamation point that says, hey, this needs to be resubmitted, right? Now, in this case, we're going to keep step 3 easy, and we've reviewed what the supplier has responded, and we're simply going to accept that response. Okay, and so then here, Oracle Cloud has said there's a change request. So if you think about this, we've added some data. And so now Panameer will have a change request that will be a separate step. All right, so now we're logged in as Meiji. She has the role of AP_manager. She's really in charge of being the gatekeeper of changes and additions to the supplier records or database or whatever we want to call it. And so she's what I call supplier control. And so now what happened? First, we created the initiative. Second, we sent it out. Scott, the supplier, responded. third, Calvin, the one who created the initiative, reviewed the response and said this is good, accepted it. That created a change on Panameer's supplier record. So since May G is the owner of those records, she gets notified that there's a change request. So we can go through and look at this. She'll see all the details, or we could have simply clicked the approve button there. It would have been every bit the same. Okay, so here we are. May G's looking at the changes made by Scott, the supplier, as part of Calvin's supplier initiative. And so she can see the approval history. She can see here what has been changed, that he added veteran-owned, self-certified, right? You could see if they wanted an expiration date, they could reject this. In this case, we're going to keep it simple. And May, and again, this is workflow, so your environment or the environment you work in or build could be slightly different. This is just the way this particular environment or instance of Oracle Cloud is set up. Okay, so that's it for this step 4, where May G approved a supplier profile change request as a result of initiative from Scott the supplier. Okay, so here we are in step 5. This is the final step, in which we're now logged back in as Calvin. So full circle here. Calvin created and launched the initiative. The supplier responded. Calvin reviewed and accepted that response. It created a supplier change request. May G, the owner of supplier records, supplier control, she then approved the change. So now Calvin is going to go back in. We'll use a springboard this time. And so we'll go back into supplier qualifications, takes us into the work area. We're going to open the task panel. And from here, this time, we're going to go into manage initiatives. So this is the actual supplier initiative. We're going to click the monitor button here. That takes us in. And now what you'll notice is we've got some status here, kind of just like we have for PO, the view details. And then we also have an enabled button down here where we can evaluate the qualification, right? Now this is simple because we've only got one, but you'll notice that we've launched the supplier initiative. There's been received responses. They've been accepted, right? We can see the status there. We haven't completed them. We're ready for review in terms of the evaluators evaluating the responses to this qualification area. So very similar to what you see in the setup. You have the qual area, the details, and then you have the underlying questions. You have the same thing here. Only this time you have all the answers to those questions. So now, whoever is responsible for evaluating the responses, that person now is coming in here. So it really could be any variety of people, depending on who the owner, if you will, of this effort is. Okay, so we're going to make it simple. We're just going to go through. We need to add a couple different fields. So right down here, what you're going to need to say as we get ready to finalize this and say this qualification is good, well, then that's great. When does that qualification start? Well, let's say it starts immediately. All right, and when does it end? So if we say it's going to end in 1 year, all right, we can go through here and we could go back and say it ends in 24. If we wanted to set up an expiration period or a next evaluation date, we could do that. If we wanted to make them automatically requal, we could do that if these were perpetual contracts or something. And again, that's really just part of the setup. Those are separate videos. We're just trying to show end to end. Lastly, what I will say is we can share with the supplier so we can let them know what happened. We then pick an outcome, pass, and we can make some comments here if we wanted. You see all the details over here. So this is where you'd go to see what the questions were, what the responses were, right? And that's it. So that's how you go end to end. And this is how I complete step 5 in my supplier qualification. And now we can see that's been finalized. We can see all the details here. But I want to show you where that qual can be found and what it looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to done here. We're going to go out of this particular supplier qualification application. And we're going to jump quickly into suppliers. And when we get into suppliers, we're going to go out of the workbench and we're going to run into manage suppliers. And our supplier here is Panameer. And I've got a few of those just because that's who we're using for test data. Here's Panameer, our supplier. Let's open that. So you'll see when we get to this page, profile, addresses, sites, contacts. Guess what? Qualifications. So if we click here, you'll see those qualifications internally. If you are the supplier, let's go take a look at that. Okay, and here we're logged into Scott, the supplier, and we're in the supplier portal functional area. Click the supplier portal application. And once again, just like when we started or when Scott responded, reviewed and responded, I can go down into the qualifications section here and I can click on view qualifications. And that's going to show Scott all the qualifications that he has. And guess what? Here's modern data set, which is the one that we perform, and any information that goes along with it. Scott can click that and he can take a look at what he answered and where those questions are just as easily right here. So that's it for the end-to-end supplier qualification walkthrough, as well as how the supplier and the buyer can see them on the supplier's profile in Oracle Cloud.